Hello and welcome to the series on Microsoft 365. In this video, we'll be looking at groups and creating groups in Azure Active Directory. It's important to mention if you'd like to follow along, you should have access to Azure Active Directory as well as know how to create users in Azure Active Directory. If you don't know how to create users, you can always review my video on creating identities in Office 365 and then come back to this video at a later point. So in this video, we'll be creating a group. We'll be creating a dynamic group, and based on certain query parameters, any user that you add to your Azure Active Directory will automatically be added to this group. So I'll include in the video description a link to the Microsoft site that gives you a comparison of the different groups in Azure Active Directory. So the first group that we have is the Microsoft 365 group, and this is the recommended group by Microsoft. It will automatically create additional groups such as Teams, SharePoint sites, and OneDrive, etc. So the next group that we have is distribution groups. Basically, this is used to send emails to a group of users. It's important to mention that with distribution groups, you cannot add security to it, so there's no permissions assigned to that group. But with security groups, you can assign different permission levels, and based on the permission levels, the users within that group will have access to certain resources and services. And then the fourth group that we have is mail-enabled security groups. This is basically a combination of distribution groups and security groups. And then lastly, we have shared mailboxes. So as the name implies, a shared mailbox allows you to share a single mailbox with multiple users. I would recommend that you go through the documentation just to get a better understanding of what's in the groups and when to use which group. It's always useful to review the documentation from Microsoft, as it can change, and to be up to date is quite important. The next page that we will be looking at is dynamic groups. I will also include this in the video description. And basically, a dynamic group is a group that you can assign users and devices to based on a query that you specify. So within your query, you can specify certain variables based on the user's profile or the device's profile, and based on the parameters that you set, that it will trigger automatically when you create a new user or edit a user's information. So this is very important because if you have, say, around 10,000 users on your tenant, if you can automate the process of assigning some of those users to different groups, it will save a lot of your time rather than you having to do this manually. So I'll include this in the description, and you can review all the information on the query builder and just get some more information on that. But we will be creating a dynamic group, and we will set up our own query in the query builder. So if we hop over to Microsoft Admin Center, you can see over here in the previous video, we went to users and active users. And from there, we clicked on an add user to create a user. And currently, you can see that I have the 3 or 4 users created on my tenant. The same is with groups. So under groups, you can see we have active groups. And currently, we only have the 2 groups that were automatically created when we created our tenant. So note that the group types are Microsoft 365. As I mentioned, those are the default groups or the recommended groups. And you can also see that the name of my tenant is also assigned with a Teams group. If you click on add a group, you can see we have the option for the 4 different groups that we specified. So Microsoft 365 groups, and it also says over here that this is recommended. Distribution group, it gives you some information on that. Mail-enabled security groups and security groups. I'm actually going to cancel this because within the admin center, we cannot create dynamic groups. So although the interface on the admin center is slightly better, it doesn't offer all the options that we have in Azure Active Directory, and creating dynamic groups is one of them. So what we need to do is go to portal.azure.com, and we need to go to our Azure Active Directory. If you don't see Azure Active Directory on your screen as you do on mine, not a problem. You can always type it in the top over here, for example, Azure Active Directory, and it will list all of the results matching your query. Let's just cancel that. I already have that on my screen. I only mention that because Microsoft often makes changes, and if there's a change and you don't find it over here, you should know how to find it. So if we click on View, this will take us to our overview of our Azure Active Directory. So previously we created a user, and now we'll go to the Groups tab and click on Groups, and you can see over here we have the same groups that we had in our Admin Center with the description, the membership type, the group type, and the ID and the information. You could click on one of those groups and add a user to it or modify the group, but that's not what we're going to do in this exercise. So to create a new group, you need to click on the New Group tab, and this will have a pop-up where you can enter the type of group, and note that you can see over here we only have Microsoft 365 and security groups. I'd like to create a security group, and I will give the group name Berlin. So the intention of this group is to create a group named Berlin and set it up as a dynamic group, and then any user that has in their profile the attribute Berlin under city, then they will automatically be added to this group. So imagine you're in an organization and you spread across the world. So you have offices in New York, you have offices in Tokyo, and you have offices in Berlin, and you have about 10,000 users on your tenant. If you have to do this for every single user, it's going to take a lot of your time. So to simplify that, you can create a dynamic group and automate that process. So for the description, we will add over here users in Berlin. You also have the option over here for Azure AD role can be assigned to the group. This is in preview, so I'm going to leave that on no. And then the membership type, if you click on the information over here, you can see it gives you some information saying select dynamic or assigned membership for the group. So if we click on the drop down, you can see assigned. Assigned would mean that you would have to manually assign all Berlin users to the Berlin group, but we have the option to have a dynamic user or a dynamic device. So when creating or editing users, we want this to apply to our users, not our devices, but you could create a similar rule for every device where the device would be added to a specific group. But as I mentioned, I would like to use this with our users, and I'll click on user. And if you scroll down, you can see you can have an owner of the group. I would recommend adding an owner, but for this purpose, because it's going to be added automatically, it's not really necessary, but you should really be, in theory, adding an owner of a group. This would allow that owner to add the users to the group and also delete the users. And then over here, under the owner, we have the dynamic user members. And if you click on the add dynamic query, this will display your query builder. So with the query builder, you can see over here, you have the operator for and or, you have the property, you have the operator, and you have the value. So we will be selecting our property, which is city. And if you scroll down, you can see each user has a number of attributes that you can specify, and you can also create custom attributes. But for this purpose, we will be using the property of city. And we will also select the operator to equals, and the value we will set to Berlin. So imagine in Germany you didn't only have one city office in one city. You probably had another office in Hamburg as an example. In that case, you could set another query where you would say, for example, or city equals Hamburg. So any user that we specify with either a city of Berlin or Hamburg would add it to a specific group. But I only want to have this added for Berlin, so I will leave that. I just wanted to show you that you could add multiple queries. And at the bottom over here, you can see your syntax for your rule that it will create. And if we click on Save, this will take us back to our group information. If we click on Create Group, this will create a new group. Notice over here you've got the name of the group, you've got the type of group, which is a security group. So we could assign certain permissions to this group. And then over here we also have the membership type. So over here this is a dynamic group, whereas the other two groups are assigned, so we have to manually add the users to those groups. We didn't add a user, an owner of the group, so there's no user information added over here. But if we added a user as the owner, this would also be displayed over here. If we go back to our overview of Azure Active Directory, we can see over here we've got our groups and users. And if we click on users, you can see over here we have all of users listed. And if I click on test 3, and you scroll down, you can see over here, here are the attributes that I mentioned. So job title, department, manager, company name, and then all the settings. So you could have street, state, province, and city. So the item that we're looking at is city, but you could create a rule based on any of those attributes or create dynamic attributes or new attributes. So let's click on edit. And if we scroll down to city and we say Berlin, and we save this. And if we go back to our Azure Active Directory overview, and we go back to groups, we have our Berlin group over here. And if we click on here, and you go to members, you can see test 3 has automatically been added to this group. So when editing users or editing devices, they can automatically be added to a group based on the attribute that you've edited or added or removed, as well as with new users. So if I create a new user and set the city to Berlin, that user would appear in here. Great, so in this video, we went over Azure Active Directory groups and created a dynamic group to automatically assign users with the attribute of city to that specific group.